Hi, this is Anthony Esposito, and I'll be giving you a little lesson today about evolution and its basic mechanisms. The basics for evolution. Um, the thing about evolution is that life on Earth is constantly changing, whether people see it or not. It changes in the short term, it changes in the long term. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. Um, you can observe it directly and indirectly. Things we can measure it with, we can actually measure the rate of new mutation in an organism's DNA. We can also observe the spread of new genetic variants in the population, especially in bacteria. Um, and we can see the effects of genetic change on the form and function of organisms. So we can see how these mutations and change in their DNA affects their physical shape and form and what they can do. And biologists so far over the years have assembled a large body of evidence to prove evolution and how exactly it happens, and how evolution happened in the past, over the past 3.5 billion years that life has been on Earth. And the application of these mechanisms um, to solve problems biologically we have today is called evolutionary theory, and it's useful for a lot of things. Um, for a lot of people, without evolutionary theory, we wouldn't be alive because um, a lot of things, medications that we have today, are based on evolutionary theory and how we apply evolution for medicines. Like, for example, without evolutionary theory, we wouldn't have any antibiotics at all, which saves hundreds of millions of lives. Um, and it also helps us develop new antibiotics after the bacteria have developed resistance to these original antibiotics. It also helps us increase crop production, um, and it helps us as in general make predictions about the biological world and what things like bacteria can do, even though we haven't seen it. A lot of people get confused because they don't really know the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Um, a theory is like a whole, broad idea that has a large amount of evidence backed up, and it's a very broad idea that can be proved in several different ways. Well, a hypothesis is a prediction that is specific and can, if proven, can serve as evidence for a theory. And in the scientific community, the theory of evolution is not disputed at all. um, we observe evolution all the time, whether people like it or not. Um, the history of evolutionary theory goes back to the early 1800s, but before that, people didn't really realize, or they did not want to realize, the theory of evolution, mostly because of culture, religion, or since evolution takes such a long time to have a physical effect on the human eye, that we figured that life was unchanging, always was the same, and always will be the same. And evolution is basically driven by these four things: mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, and selection. A mutation is any change to the nucleotide sequence of an organism's DNA. Mutation is the most important part of evolution because it's the source of all genetic variation, and if you have no genetic variation at all, then evolution is not possible. So without mutation, we owe all the diversity of life on Earth to random mutations that happen, and they happen randomly. There's no specific thing that mutations do. They just, every time a DNA gets copied, something can go wrong. The DNA gets copied wrong, and it could be neutral, beneficial, or bad, which means it can have a good effect on the organism and help it survive, or it could be really bad and it won't live long enough to reproduce. And the thing about mutations that's weird is that they vary by type of organism. Like bacteria, they mutate really, really, really fast compared to humans. So, for example, that leads to antibiotic resistance that have formed over the last only about 30 years. Another is gene flow, is when individuals move from population to population, and the populations may have different genetic makeup, so they bring the genetic information along with them. Like, for example, in here, the deer over here are mostly like a yellowish tan color, and over here they're like a brown. But when some of the yellow deer move over to the east through the mountain pass, which usually they do not do, they mix in with the local population and introduce a new allele for the orange coat. Something else about evolution is another mechanism is genetic drift, and along with mutations, these are random, and there's not really a reason why it does this, it's just due to chance. But in large populations, like the one over here, it's based on 2,000 individuals, you can see that the alleles, they change some, but they usually stay around 50%, which means that doesn't change a whole lot. But as your population gets smaller, like here 200 and here 20, the effect of genetic drift increases. Like, for example, over here, some alleles have made it to 100% of the population, and some of these have just completely died out just due to random chance, not any selective pressure. And the most famous mechanism for evolution is selection, and they directly influence the phenotype and genotype of organisms. There's 3 types of selections generally. There's artificial, sexual, and natural. The photo over here is shown of how we artificially selected poodles to create toy poodles. As you can see, we just chose the smallest poodles in a population, just kept on breeding the smallest and smallest poodles after the generations. So eventually we just got to this tiny little poodles that don't really, they're cute, but whatever. And then sexual selection, like this bird right here, it does not help it survive. Like, it's like that is really flashy and it draws attention, and that means a predator can kill it. But it survived because it's sexually advantageous to have it, and if the other sex is more attracted to it, then you're more likely to have more offspring. And then there's natural selection, of course. And there's biotic and abiotic natural selection, which is based on what is selecting for it is alive or just the surrounding environment. And thank you so much for sticking with me and watching this video, and I hope you had a lot of fun. Thank you.